Welcome to Beyond Death, the podcast where we challenge old narratives, explore the unexpected, and spotlight the brilliant minds redefining the death space. I'm your guest host, Dr. Susie Shelmerdine, co-founder of Anubix, children's imaging specialist, and associate professor of radiology. If you've been with us since the beginning, you'll know there's one question we ask every guest before they go. What is the one common misconception people have about your job, your role, the death industry, or even about you? Sometimes we also ask our guests to share something surprising or a little known fact they have about themselves. To celebrate 1 year of Beyond Death, we've created this special episode, which is a montage of those very moments. You'll hear reflections that are funny, heartfelt, and occasionally surprising. See if you can guess who's speaking and what they might be referring to in their world of work. A huge thank you to all of the incredible guests who feature. Their names are listed in our episode notes, and to our regular hosts whose voices also feature in some of these clips. That includes Mark Viner, Lindsay Batty-Smith, and our original hosts, Drs. David Annan and Asanda Koza. Now let's get stuck into some of the most memorable truths and surprises from our first year on air.
If there is one thing in particular that you would like to demystify about what it is that you do, what is it?
That's interesting. Yeah. I think if you say to people that you're a forensic radiographer, maybe even a forensic radiologist, I don't think they really have a clue what it involves. The word forensic obviously sounds really interesting. Oh, gosh, that's fascinating. What do you do? And it is really such an interesting field and so very, very wide, actually. You know, it's anything from evaluating determining the cause of death to evaluating injuries to identifying the deceased. I don't know. I mean, I think it's the absolute scale of it, isn't it? Because those two words actually encapsulate a whole range of technology and procedures, which is very difficult to convey to people in a short space of time. So misconception that you just deal with the dead, because, you know, forensic radiology is applied to the living equally as to the dead. So I suppose that if I ask what's the main misconception, I think forensic always, a lot of people just think dead, and that's not the case.
Would you mind telling us what you think is a common misconception about your job?
Oh, yes. Well, radiographers, most people, maybe I'm a little bit cynical over the years, but think that a radiographer mends radios or does something like that. The public really don't know really what a radiographer is, but when you say x-rays, everyone knows what that is. So the role of the radiographer is still quite an unknown thing. It's, again, not featured much in soap operas or anything like that. So radiographers, and also the word imaging is much more commonly used now. So imaging tech, I don't know, but radiographers, we like that term. But I think the general public don't really know what we do. I can give you an example of that. As a governor at King's, they were putting out a new patient information pack, and they put everyone's uniform in there, bar a radiographer. And I went, oh, excuse me, you need to put the radiographer's uniform in. And they said, oh, well, you don't really go to the wards much, do you? And I went, oh, excuse me, we spend our life on the ward.
I think sometimes people might think that I work with remains of people that are much more recent and are probably fleshed. I think sometimes they find that quite difficult to separate. So maybe sometimes they hear about lots of things to do with forensics, and so they sometimes think that might be more my role. I use forensic methods, so we sort of share similarities there, but I can't have or look after anyone that is less than 100 years old. So mine is really all about, you know, historical and archaeological. And I think sometimes people get that muddled. And sometimes I think what's great about us having the centre and doing outreach events is that it isn't because it's like me or other people thinking I want to go and disturb these individuals in these burial grounds. It's because we're responding to what's happening in the development of London and any city or metropolitan area. So I think sometimes people might think it's that like we're choosing to go to some of these areas or do things, and that isn't the case. It's a response to it. So it's a sort of like a tandem thing really there. Sometimes the time period that they might think I deal with, or the the nature of the remains and then how I've actually come to have them and look after them.
I think the most common misconception about the role of a coroner is to confuse the role of a coroner with the role of the pathologist. And I think that probably, to an extent, comes from the fact that in the United States, the role of the coroner is very different from the role of the coroner in England and Wales. And so very often our views about what somebody does are formed by television and films. So very often, if I tell somebody that I'm a coroner, they may, for example, assume that I have some sort of role like Quincy.
Everyone thinks that we're really weird people who sit in the dark and just deal with dead people. That's the most common. Most people do not want to. If you say you're a pathologist, that's usually a bit of a conversation killer. The reality is, the majority of pathologists don't go anywhere near a dead person, and a lot of the, particularly the more recently trained pathologists, don't want to go anywhere near them. I think pathologists have got a bit of a reputation of being socially awkward, not terribly good communicators. I think these things are all untrue. There are many people across all specialties who are poor communicators. Or good communicators. It may be that people in pathology are maybe a little shyer than average if you look across the range, but that's certainly not the case. I like a bit of peace and quiet, but I'm not shy. I think that pathology has had a really bad reputational image, and I think the organ retention scandal, and I'm not defending pathologists, but there was some ambiguity in the tissue retention laws around the time of that scandal. People obviously took that very, very far. That didn't do us any favours either. But the reality is you cannot run a hospital without a pathology service. If you take pathology out of the service, it will just stop. No one gets their biopsies reported. No one knows what disease anyone's got. No one knows what anyone died of. People cannot be buried. It is as every part of the hospital is a critical part.
A lot of people just assume that the work we do is really interesting and really cool, and like they see on the TVs with like crime scene investigation and dealing with loads of murders and this, that, and the other one. Actually, it's just not at all. I'd say the majority, like over 90% of our caseload, is just normal coronial work where a member of the aging population has essentially just suddenly passed. And they come to us, we need to find out why. But yeah, I think if you're expecting to deal with a lot of interesting cases, it's probably not the career for you. So yeah, we deal with a lot of routine sort of deaths, and that's sort of the main bulk of our work. But yeah, I'd say that's the biggest common misunderstanding, that, whenever I tell people what I do, and everyone's like, oh, that's so interesting, that's so cool, I'd love to do that. And we actually think of it, it's just like, well, yeah, the first scan you do, you'll be like, oh my God, this is amazing. But the second scan you do, it's just like, okay, it's pretty much exactly the same as the first one. So it's quite a lot of repetitive scans. You get the odd interesting case here and there, but nowhere near as much as what people think. So I'd say that's probably the biggest one.
Yeah, I'm a priest as well, and if I wear a dog collar, I think often people have misconceptions as to what kind of a priest I am. So I think that life is full of surprises, and I'm always open to learning. Every day's a school day.
And I think that people, when they think about what I do and they hear that I do stuff about death investigation, automatically go to CSI or to Sign and Witness. And they think that it's all about that technical forensic DNA, massive minority report test like technology. And it just isn't like that. It's about people, blunt instruments, and doing the best you can, understanding how someone died, who they were, and caring about that. And actually, it's pretty grim, and it's not sexy, and it's not, particularly innovative. Even PMCT isn't, it's just a CT scanner with the dead body in it at the end of the day. And then you're looking at the scans and interpreting them. And so it's that stepping back and going, actually, well, number one, I'm just an academic. I'm just there observing, speaking to people, understanding it, thinking about the implications of this. So I'm not doing any of that stuff at all. And secondly, the stuff I am watching isn't anything like that. It doesn't make it less valid, but it does make it really quite different.
My job in a mortuary, and anyone will tell you, everyone says to me, "Oh, is it like Silent Witness?" No, Silent Witness does not give you the smells or some of the things that we have to deal with. So that's a misconception. Another one is that a mortuary is haunted. Again, in all the mortuaries I've been in, that's a misconception. I think that's not true, no.
Revelation.
But I think on a serious note, I think the misconception is that digital is the change. And, I think digital is an enabler to change. People are still the success of digital transformation. We can put in all the tech we like, but actually it's not going to make that much difference if we don't have the people using it.
So what I've found is quite often people don't actually have a grasp of what it is a radiologist actually does and where they fit into the reporting / post-mortem imaging space. Certainly, the roles between radiologist and radiographer are often mixed up, and we work very closely with our fantastic radiographers who are very, very skilled, and some of our roles have similarities in some aspects of work where we come together, but we do have different training and different position descriptions. And I think one of the main reasons that there may be a lack of awareness about what we do is that overall, so far, there's still maybe a general lack of awareness that post-mortem imaging exists, what it can do, and how it can be helpful. And going forwards, this is certainly something that I'd like to see being opened up to more people becoming aware of this, more families, more clinicians and doctors in the broader community, so that they can become empowered to have those discussions with families.
Pathologists get annoyed by people thinking we're just like CSI or Silent Witness, when actually about 50% of our work is with the living. And that's, I suppose to an extent that's true, but I don't really mind when, why would you expect anyone with a non-medical background to think otherwise when that's what people get exposed to through the media? But actually, I suppose the thing I would change would be to improve the understanding of other doctors about the role of pathology and what we can and cannot do, and so to help them better understand what tests are appropriate and how to request them appropriately. I think that's my thing is, I quite enjoyed the weird quality assurance roles that go around departments. The one in pathology, I performed in our lab for a couple of years, and having the opportunity to make your lab slicker, more efficient, safer. These are all things that we should aspire to as pathologists. And I think that really starts with educating our junior colleagues who work in the hospital and our clinical colleagues as to, sometimes the black box that is pathology, where tissue comes in and a report comes out, and deciphering the report and what the limitations of that report are can be massively important for future patient care.
Oh gosh, I'm trying to think. There's so many of them.
I bet.
With my books, I tell a story, and I must say that my books are not all about serial killers. Not everybody in my book has killed somebody, because that's something that I do have a bit of a problem with, in media, that these are the stories that we tell, where there are so many other stories that are worth telling.
Nothing is realer than a discussion about death, and I can't imagine, if I got to live a really, really long life, I don't think there is a more interesting discussion than this one. And I will have this discussion until I am hopefully on my dying bed.
A lot of my family members couldn't swim. And then, my mum was like, right, everyone, when we come back to England, you are all going to learn to swim. And I'm glad I did, because when I was 10 years old, I actually saved my mum from drowning when we was on holiday in Portugal in the sea. So I've always been advocate for water safety and learning how to swim. And when I became a lifeguard, there was a cohort of us that were from Black African communities, and we was really grateful that we have the opportunity to advocate for our community to be lifeguards and to swim. So that is something unusual. People probably don't expect me to be a lifeguard.
Yeah. Wow.
But
There you
yeah, I
go.
really,
That's
really enjoyed
interesting.
being a lifeguard.
And it's interesting, a coroner's officer and lifeguard. I like that.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions a lot of people make the assumption is that you've decided to go ahead and open your own, your own company, and you've decided to do this for money. That the reason why we're doing this is financially incentivized, because there's a lot of, I think, demonization of the private sector, which I think is very unfair, because I think both in NHS, private sector, no matter where you are, it's the same thing. The good people will do a good job and want to do it for the good reasons, and those who are not so good will have different intentions, regardless of whether it's public or private sector. As you know, Susie, both of us have not taken a single penny at the moment, from Anubix at all. We have been trying to reinvest it, doing charity work, right now, because we want this as a concept to survive. So we haven't done this for money. Saying that, in entrepreneurship, there's no shame in actually making money from what you're doing. The same as there's no shame in making money in the NHS, as long as you're not swindling people along the way, you're not doing anything bad by anybody alongside. I think that's one assumption, that it's money driven, and it's absolutely not. Everybody who's in our team, everybody who is doing this fantastic job, they're all doing this out of passion, and it's a fantastic thing to see. To see people wanting to do this because they enjoy it, because they believe in it, because they genuinely want to help people. So I think that's one misconception that people do have, because I think it's just they assume private and they paint everybody with the same brush, but you can't do that, whether in the private or in the public sector.
What's the biggest misconception you think people have about post-mortem imaging and education in this space?
I think the biggest misconception probably is that it's unattainable. I think people think that it's not possible to get it, it's too difficult to get it. But actually now there are more and more courses that are out, there are more and more people who are in this space. And also it's a very passionate, close-knit circle of people as well. So actually you can learn, you don't need a master's in it in order to learn it. You can absolutely learn, and you can learn in a way that is, you can become an expert in it as well. So I think that's the one thing.
One of the big things is that, as we've sort of discussed in depth previously, is the fact that it's just regular radiography, but with deceased patients. There's not much more to it than that, which obviously, as we've discussed, there is a lot more. Even though we're using similar radiography techniques, everything else about postmortem imaging is a lot different. So that is definitely one of the things that we get. People don't realize, like we said, the professionals that we're working with, the amount of knowledge you need to have, understanding the death processes and how that's going to look different on imaging, how that even affects your positioning of patients and things like that. Other things would be that most of the work we do is either high profile or super exciting forensic cases. Unfortunately, that isn't the truth. Most of our cases, I would probably say about 99%, are routine work that we would say, coronial work. We're looking at natural deaths, accidents, situations where the causes of death are unclear, but they aren't forensic cases, so the police aren't involved. They're not criminal investigations. Only about 1% of our work are those exciting, high-profile cases. Another misconception, I would say, is that we work alone. Particularly, people always think we work in a really old, spooky building, that mortuaries are really scary. They're not. And as we said, we are part of this multidisciplinary team, this new sort of hybrid way of working between pathology and radiology. And we work very, very closely with the APTs. It's very integral to our role that we have that working relationship and that we understand each other, and that we're always collaborating to get our patients done.
Unfortunately, we had a terrorist attack in 2012 in Toulouse. He performed a terrorist attack in a Jewish high school. And so he killed a rabbi, and he killed also 3 young children who were 4, 5, and 7 years old. So it's completely different compared with the classical forensic activity. And it was particularly emotional because also it was children, and so we had to go first at the school and examine the bodies, and then the bodies were transferred at the Medical Legal Institute. So we performed a PMCT, and then we performed the autopsy. I mean, this terrorist attacks, it was during maybe 2 or 3 weeks, long, and so you could smell the fear in the city, because everybody knew that there was a killer on a scooter, So even when you were driving and you were looking eventually to a guy on a scooter, So it was very, very, very particular.
But the one thing is, I have a disarticulated skeleton under my bed. Plastic, hasten to add, but I do.
Excellent.
And that brings us to the end of this special anniversary episode of Beyond Death. We hope you enjoyed this behind-the-scenes look into the beliefs, myths and surprises that shape this field and the people in it. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe to the show, follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram under Anubix, or share this episode with a friend or colleague. And if you have a moment, rating or reviewing the podcast really helps us reach more curious minds. Thanks again for listening and for being part of our growing community. This might be the end of the episode, but there's always more beyond death.